We're back. Welcome to another episode of Heat Check. Yes, I'm dressed up. Halloween was before the last one, but you know what? I decided the Heat need a Jedi to pull them out of this. So there you go. Or they need to go to the dark side and start beating people up. Last night was a Halloween show all in itself. Oh, I'm John Devine. This is Anthony Chang, but you guys already know that. We've been doing this since the season started. Let's just start with last night. You want to do the good, the bad, or the ugly? How do you want to start with this?
Let's start with the good. I mean, why not, right? Let's start on a positive. Phoenix is a very good team, right? They're 7-1 now. The Heat played well for most of the game. They led by 15 with 3 minutes left in the third quarter. They were on their way to really their first quality win of the season. With Bam and Jimmy really not having great nights, they still were in that position against a very good team. But again, there was a drought on both ends of the court where Heat were making shots, they couldn't defend, and Phoenix got back in the game. And whenever you're in a close game with Kevin Durant, that's not where you want to be, right? If the team that has Kevin Durant in most close games is going to win. And that's what happened. Kevin Durant made a lot of tough shots down the stretch. The Heat had one possession, still had a possession to tie the game, final seconds, with one opportunity. They didn't get a shot off. We can talk about that in a few minutes. But the good is you see the flashes of what this team can be in stretches, right? I mean, even against the Kings, they were up by 15 there too in the third quarter. Against the Knicks, they were up by 13 in the third quarter. They've blown all those leads. The good is they're putting themselves in a spot where they have those big leads in the second half. Now the next step is finding a way to finish these games and not let these teams go on these big runs.
Okay, let's give Tyler Hero credit where it's due.
That too.
Kind of went off again.
Yeah, he's playing well. Yeah, that's getting lost. He's been their best player so far. Kind of taking a quote unquote leap. His shot profile is a lot more efficient. He's not taking as many long twos. He's hitting most of, really, I don't know what he's at 3-point percentage, but it's probably not sustainable. He's probably close to like 45%, probably going to go down a little bit. But the point is he's hitting his threes. He's finishing a lot better on the rim. He's drawing more fouls. Everything we wanted to see from him this season, we've seen it. He has not been the problem so far. Tyler Hero has definitely been the best offensive player on the team so far, and yeah, he looks like he's improved a lot.
Other good. Let's see, more good things. Haywood Highsmith.
Yeah, he played well.
They dusted him off, and it also gives. We keep seeing, hey, Jovic is starting, but it's if you look at the minutes, that's not starters minutes. Haywood Highsmith brings something that outside of Jimmy, they may not have, which is guarding along the perimeter like that. I mean, Bam guards everywhere. That doesn't count. But I mean, those swingmen, those 2 threes, maybe
those
even
wings.
a guard
in
a pinch. I mean, he gives them something they don't have in that starting lineup.
Yeah, I to your point on Haywood, and this is a broader point, this team has a lot of depth, right? I think we've seen that already. The way they're kind of shuffling around different bench rotations every game, which is probably not ideal, right? You want to have a set rotation. But from Haywood Highsmith to Pella Larson, who's come on here these last few games playing really well. Looks like a guy that even when they're healthy, he should probably be in the rotation. He's a two-way guy that just fits with what the Heat want to do on both ends of the court. Khalil Ware gets an opportunity to play his first real minutes against Phoenix last night. He gave them solid minutes. And that's with Jaime Jaquez and Kevin Love out, 2 guys who are probably definitely going to be in the bench rotation when they come back. So the good thing is there is a lot of depth here. There's a lot of ways Eric Spoelstra can go, a lot of options. I mean, we saw that with Haywood Highsmith starting the second half in place of Jovic. We saw that with Khalil Ware playing as the backup center over Thomas Bryant yesterday. We've seen Pella Larson playing extended minutes these last 3 games after not playing at all, really, the first 3 or 4 games of the season. So Eric Spoelstra is still obviously figuring out things, and that's what happens when you have a very deep team, because you have a lot of options who can play. So that's definitely a positive. Haywood looked very good. I always thought that if they were going to make a move in the starting lineup, which I don't know if they will, this was a second half switch. They opened the second half with Haywood over Jovic. But I always say if they make a move in the starting lineup at some point, Haywood instead of over Jovic probably makes sense because they're just different players, right? It depends on what you want. Haywood's a really good defender. They kind of need him to play over Jovic against Phoenix because they needed someone to guard Kevin Durant, and Haywood did that. And it helped that Haywood shot the ball really well, 7 of 8 from the field. I mean, it's not going to happen every night, but he just played really well last night. So we'll see if that sticks in Denver. Will they start Haywood over Jovic? I asked Eric Spoelstra after the game about that. He was kind of non-committal and said nothing is set in stone. It's game to game, minute to minute. The typical coach answer. But we'll find out in a few days. When they play the Nuggets.
Well, 2 things. We're talking about who's starting and everything. Who's starting matters, and it really doesn't. It's overall extended minutes, I think.
For sure. But I think for this team, it might matter more than most in this situation, because I agree with you for the most part. I always think starting is overrated. But the third quarter has been such a disaster for this team that they need to start second halves well. They can't continue to be outscored by 15 points in the first 8 minutes of the third quarter. So, yes, I agree. Closing games matters. Whoever plays more minutes matters, right? Like, if Jovic starts and plays 7 minutes and Harry Smith plays off the bench and gets 25, right, how much does starting matter? But these third quarters have been such a big issue for this team that at this point, I think the starting lineup does matter, right? Even if it's like one starting lineup to start the game and then maybe last night, then you use a different lineup to start the second half. I don't know what the answer is. But yeah, I think the point is they have to start second halves better. So that lineup does matter, when they come out of halftime.
Well, and that leaves one other thing. With this depth, and you kind of hinted at it, but as much as we're like, oh, it's great to have depth, maybe one, if you have that many options, you're trying to push the right buttons with the right people at the right time. So it's like, okay, Highsmith won 7 for 8 last night?
Yeah.
Okay. So he gets to Denver, he may not be 7 for 8. And then you're like, oh, maybe he went too long for it. It sounds bad, but maybe there's too much depth.
Yeah, I mean, that's a thing for sure. That's a thing. I agree. I kind of agree. I think it's a good problem to have, I guess, in a way, but it could cause issues because, again, just look at the bench rotation through the first 7 games. It's been different pretty much every single game, right? And they've been relatively healthy. You want guys to get into a rhythm. You want guys to know kind of when they're going into the game, who they're playing with. That all helps continuity, helps chemistry. And so far, again, it's early still. They're still working through things, but so far that really hasn't been the case. So I do agree with you that having too much depth, while I'd rather have too much depth than too little depth, it does come with challenges, right? And it will help when there are injuries. Like, they really haven't had any big injuries so far. We saw what happened last year when they needed depth, right? When they were so injured at 35 different starting lineups. So, maybe it will be really, really beneficial later in the season when they run into, to their injury stretch where maybe they're dealing with a few injuries. But right now, yeah, I think it is challenging. I mean, look, even Josh Richardson, who just came back from injury himself, he didn't even play last night, and he played, I think, 20, 30 minutes against the Kings a few nights ago. So that's with Haywood Highsmith too. Haywood Highsmith played 30 minutes last night. He had 2 DNPs earlier in the season, last week. So it's just this fluctuating rotation right now that I think probably is challenging guys a little bit to build some rhythm.
And, we're saying all this, and like you said before, J. Jonah Jameson, Jaime Jaquez Jr., 3 J's. The guy was 3 J's.
Triple J, yeah.
And Kevin Love hasn't played all year. So once you integrate that back in, if it's all healthy, yes, it's a good problem to have, but I don't envy the fact that Spo has to find the right combinations and push the right buttons all the time with 10 to 12 guys instead of most people saying 6 to 8 guys you could really, really count. On any given night, you could go 10, 12 deep.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's fortunate and unfortunate. We spoke a little bit about the rookies. Let's go a little bit more on it because, we're talking where he actually got to play ahead of Thomas Bryant last night. And you're talking about Pelle Larsson. And, most people, well, the Heat is not one of those places. But most times you hear second round pick. You're like, it's a second round
G
pick.
League, right? Yeah.
But here, when you have that reputation of finding those diamonds in the rough consistently and pulling guys, it's like, if you could talk about what Ware brings, we know, but what you saw last night from him and what Larson brings, which is a two-way player, which is something there's always a need for.
Yeah, with Pella, what opened my eyes was when Eric Spoelstra called him an elite role player before the season. I was like, that's high praise coming from Eric Spoelstra for a guy who has never played in a real NBA game yet, right? An elite role player. And is he elite yet? Probably not, but you could just see like what Eric Spoelstra was talking about. I mean, he's a guy that, again, he's a good defender. Like, they put him on De'Aaron Fox in these important situations against the Kings a few nights ago, and he held up well. He even guarded Keegan Murray. This shows you his versatility to guard a guard and then a forward as well. He's not small. Like, he's 6'5", solid, has some versatility on defensive end, plays tough, will put his body on the line, takes charges. And then offensively, he doesn't need the ball to make an impact, which is huge for this team, right? Because you have so many guys who, like we've talked about, who kind of are better with the ball in their hands, better with, off the dribble, creating and playmaking. Pella's not the type of guy. He's a spot-up shooter. He's a great cutter. You look at his touches; he doesn't get a lot of touches, but his points per touch is very efficient. That just kind of shows he makes the most of his opportunities. So yeah, I really think Pella, they need a guy like that in the rotation. I think even when Jaime and Kevin come out, I think they got to find a spot for him. I think he's that helpful on both ends of the court. As far as Khalil, it was what you would expect from a day. I know he's played a couple games before the Phoenix game, but they were garbage time. This is what you would expect from a rookie, in his debut. Like, there were moments of impressive moments. He made an open three. He had a block or two blocks. I think he definitely blocked a layup. He had one block, two steals. He had a dunk on when Nurkic was trying to save the ball from out of bounds. He went right to Khalil. It was an easy dunk. But you saw the skill set, right? What the Heat like. There were sometimes he looked a little bit lost on the offensive end. He hasn't been on the court much, hasn't played much. But you see the skill set. My thing with Khalil is I think when Kevin Love comes back, which is probably going to be during this trip at some point as he works his way back into game shape, I would think Khalil and Thomas Bryant probably are both out of the rotation at that point because Kevin will have take up those minutes, those backup center minutes. But I do think with Pella, I think there's a real opportunity to play consistently, even when those guys return, because of what he provides on both ends of the court, and they kind of need that from the guard spot.
I want to bang on the Ware drum just a little bit more, and that is there's one thing it looks like he can provide that others can't. I mean, Bam does, but outside of that, and that is changing and altering shots in that lane.
Yeah.
For everybody else, is there anybody else who can really alter how they come to the lane outside of Ware?
No, not even Bam. Bam doesn't really do it like that, right? He does it differently. He does it with his versatility, his quickness, his speed of staying in front of guys. Khalil's a traditional shot blocker. He's a guy who's gonna protect the rim. So yeah, that's different for sure. It doesn't always mean. We saw what Hassan Whiteside, right? Hassan Whiteside blocked a ton of shots. It doesn't always mean you're a great defender.
Right.
It's helpful in situations, and it's definitely a good skill set to have in today's NBA if you could do other things around it, right, other than just block shots. But yeah, I think that's why they drafted him. They kind of saw him. They labeled him the day after drafting him a 3-and-D center. That he can be a 3-and-D center, a guy who could stretch the floor eventually, knock down threes as a 7-footer, and also be able to protect the rim at an elite level. Derek Lively is a name that has come up in comparisons with Khalil Ware. If he can turn into Derek Lively, he would be thrilled, right? Derek Lively was a very good rookie. But I just think it's going to take time, right? I mean, it's tough. Like, to play in the Heat's defensive system, you have to be in the right spots all the time. That's one way to get out of the rotation, of Eric Spoelstra's rotation. Mess up on defense a few times during a game, he's not going to put you back in. We saw it with Omar Yurtseven. We've seen it with other centers, right, in recent years. Not to say that Khalil was in the right spot, last night, but as a rookie, it's going to take time to kind of continue to learn the system and all that. But yeah, I think that's why fans want to see him play. He has a really interesting skill set that this team theoretically needs, right? Especially in certain matchups like against Boston, who has size, or other teams who have size, which we've talked about that maybe the Heat struggle against. He's someone the Heat are going to need. They need him to develop and be ready quickly, because I think down the stretch and eventually in the playoffs, if the Heat get there, you would think they're going to need Khalil and what he does on the defensive end.
Because looking at that Phoenix game last night, Wednesday night, depending on when this comes out, Nurkic is a big boy, for lack of a better way of putting it. And we even talked about at the last episode, Cat being a big boy. It's just Bam's defense is, I think we always talk about Bam's defense being versatility, being able to come over and help. That's where he gets his blocks. That's where he really makes an impact, because he can switch over, he can switch off. And just intrigued by the fact that that's one person that with where in the game, that's one person he doesn't have to necessarily worry about coming in the lane to help. If he can help out and smother out on the perimeter sometimes because there's someone with his back, that's something different. Now, you put Kevin Love, positional defense, Haywood Highsmith. If you're really lucky and you look at it, what would you say would be their ideal best defensive lineup in an ideal setting? Because I'm thinking you've got Highsmith. You could throw Larson in there. You could throw the two rookies. You could throw Bam, and you could throw Jimmy, depending on how motivated he is.
Yeah.
Granted, you don't
maybe,
have.
And then maybe Jaime or Josh Richardson, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
And can we always say that we had 5 that we could put out there like that? That's defensive and not totally kill you on the offensive end.
Yeah, it's true. And are you including Khalil in that lineup then?
Depending on what kind of offense you're playing. Right. If it's somebody with size, then yes. If it's if you're dealing with perimeter shooting, if you're dealing with someone like Boston who's going to jack up 63s a game, maybe that's a different answer. But
I think spacing would be an issue with that lineup, right? Mm-hmm. Because of the 3-point shooting, Jimmy, Bam, and even Haywood. Like Haywood will knock down a 3 or 2, but he doesn't take many per game. It's very low volume. He's not a guy who's going to put up 7, 8 a game. They have. Do they have as many good defenders as they've had in recent years? Probably not, right? They've lost Caleb Martin. They've lost Gabe Vincent. They lost Max Strus, who was a solid defender. But they still have enough. It's like we've talked about the first few weeks of the season. It's this mixing and matching. And that comes back to the team's depth, where like you're trying to balance the two of like, okay, you want some of your good defenders out there because you still need to defend, obviously. But you want to be a better offensive team than you were the last few years when you were one of the worst offenses. So you're trying to also lean toward the offense, where Tyler and Terry are playing together in the backcourt, or it's Tyler and Alec Burks, right? They're trying to find the right balance, and it's tough because yes, they have 4 or 5 good defenders they could throw in a lineup if they need to stop, but they don't have a ton of guys who do both at a really high level. Right, which is why I think Pelle Larsson is so interesting. Again, not saying he does both at a really high level right now, but you see how he can make an impact on both ends. He's a solid defender, and he's just a nice, solid player on the offensive end. Doesn't do anything flashy, but it makes the right pass, doesn't really make too many mistakes, can hit an open shot, is strong enough to drive into the lane. We've seen him get a few and ones already. So I think there's a skill set there that the Heat kind of need in their rotation. So, yes, they have some good defenders, but I would argue that I think one of the issues so far and why we've seen so much mixing and matching is because there are so many guys who do one or the other, or one much better than the other, that you're constantly trying to balance it out based on the circumstances of a game at that time.
And it's funny, you rewind 5, 6, 10 years ago, and Spo, was coining the phrase positionless basketball.
Yeah.
And what position, I think the ultimate goal of positionless basketball was, to an extent, it doesn't matter what 5 I put out there, we can have everything covered. And the man whose ideal is to do that now is dealing with things where it's almost like at the end of the game you used to see, okay, we're going to put my offensive set in. Okay, now we're going to call a timeout. Now we're going to put my defensive set in. He has to do that on a larger scale right now until he finds what works. But I don't know anybody who is better equipped to handle that than Spo.
Yeah.
So but let's give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt. That being said, let's talk about that last play of that game last night. What was that?
Yeah, it wasn't ideal, right? Not to get a shot off. It was interesting. The Suns, after the game, said they were ready to foul, so the Heat wouldn't put up the three. And the Suns never had to foul, right? Jimmy threw the ball inbounds past to Terry. The Suns trapped Terry, and once they trapped Terry threw a pass inside kind of leading Jimmy inside of the three-point line, but the Heat needed a three. Jimmy saw the open lane, kind of instinct took him to try to go to the basket. He hesitated a little bit, kind of realizing this, like after a split second, that he needed to go back to the three-point line to tie the game. A two wouldn't do it. By the time he went back, dribbled behind the three-point line, he kind of was like out of rhythm in a weird spot. He jumped in the air. Instead of shooting, he threw it to Tyler as the final buzzer sounded. Time ran out before they even took a shot. So it was a weird situation where, yes, Jimmy should have taken the three. There's no doubt. But it wasn't going to be a great shot anyway, because the pass from Terry when he was getting trapped kind of led Jimmy inside the three-point line, meaning he would have to backpedal in like a second and put up a shot out of desperation just to try to tie the game. I think it kind of put Jimmy in a rough spot. But yeah, Jimmy took the blame for it. He said it was his turnover. He needed to pull it back and take the three. He didn't. And those are the things. Like, you look at the last two games, the Sabonis putback, it was like less than a second left. You look at the Suns game, they're up by 13 in the third quarter. They still had a chance to tie the game. They win those two games. I know ifs or, ands, buts, whatever. It's not reality. But if they win those two games, right now they're 5-2. It's a big difference between 3 and 4. So it's a few points away from being 5-2. I guess that's a positive, but also the fact they're in those situations when they're blowing those big leads, that's concerning, because they've had those droughts now for years with this group of they're up by a lot, but then they have a 5-6 minute drought and the game changes. So, again, I think the optimist could say, oh, they're this close to being 5-2. But the pessimist will be like, these issues have been here for years. This is nothing new.
I'm going to equate it to our friends over at Dolphins in Depth. And if you look, they're saying the same thing. Well, you look at the last 3 games. Yeah. Hey, 61-yard field goal at the end, another field goal at the end, and then that fumble and blowing that game against Arizona. It's a similar thing. Is it something in the sand and the water or what? But it's showing up consistently with our teams as a whole. It's not just, you can take University of Miami out of the equation for this year, but I don't know if it's a focus thing or if it's tired or if it's they're finding their way. Look, in the case of the Dolphins, it's getting late in a hurry. So
yeah,
for them, it's not 1/4, 1/5 of the season. They're at the halfway point. And you don't have many. At least there are enough games here where they can right the ship. We've seen it happen before. There could be a significant run going on.
Sure.
But we would really like to see some. We'd like to see more progress. 3.5 quarters, okay. Now we want a complete game, even if it's not against Phoenix. Maybe it's against who they play, or maybe they do beat a Denver. Just something you can hang your hat on. And that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, for me, it's like I always believe, I'm a numbers guy. I always believe in the law of averages, right? And the Heat have been 54-42 in clutch games over the last 2 seasons. Usually when you play in close games, things even out. You're going to get closer to 500 eventually over a larger sample. They've been very good. They've won a lot of close games the last few years. That's been one of their formulas. They win these close games with good free throw shooting, with Jimmy executing on the stretch. But it'll burn you sometimes, just finding yourself in all these close games, because all it takes, we've seen one play, one offensive rebound by Sabonis and a putback, and you lose the game that you're up by double digits in the second half. So far this year, the Heat is 1-3 in clutch games. I just always have said, even when they were winning them, you don't want to be in this many close games because it is not sustainable winning such a high percentage of them. And I think we've seen that at the start of this year. It has gone the other way for the Heat. Is it their fault? Is it as bad as it seems? Probably not, because it's been close games. But the point is, like, when you play in close games like this, that's what's going to happen. You're going to get burned sometimes.
It's well. Let's hope the law of averages don't take a whole year, because
Yeah.
we have had years where it's like the whole. It's I think like 2 years ago they played like a ton. Even by their standards, they played a ton.
And they won a bunch of them. They were
Right.
like 20 games over 500 in clutch games, which again is not sustainable. That's not a sustainable formula to winning.
Right. So by your mathematical formula, if they go the other direction this year, that could spell a real problem. So
Yeah.
let's hope it's just a short sample size, and we go from there. Before we start wrapping up, let's talk about the rest of this road trip. Let's remind these people who they're dealing with for the rest of this road trip.
At Denver on Friday, at Minnesota on Sunday, against the Pistons, an easier game on Tuesday, and then back-to-back games against the Pacers in Indianapolis late next week. So, yeah, it's not an easy trip. 5 of the 6 games are against teams that made the playoffs last season. The Heat is currently 0-3 against teams that made the playoffs last season so far this year. So, yeah, they're going to need to if they want to have a decent trip, they're going to have to win some of these games and have some quality wins. At this point, they're 0-1. They have a very tough game against, Denver doesn't have Aaron Gordon, but still playing in Denver is tough. The Heat hasn't had much success in Denver. Really, not many teams have had success in Denver. They still have Jokic, probably the best player in the world. And then Minnesota, the Heat hasn't had much success there either lately. They obviously have Anthony Edwards and a good team. So, yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, either their Heat are going to have a breakthrough moment and maybe win a few close games here and salvage the trip, or things could get ugly, right? If they lose the next 2, which they'll be underdogs in, most likely, against Denver and Minnesota, they'll be 3-6 after 9 games. Even if you beat Detroit 4-6, you split Indiana, you hope, as for the Heat, you're coming back 5-7. That's not ideal right after 12 games, 5-7. So this is going to be telling this ship. Like I said last episode, I thought we would kind of know where the Heat are when we get to Thanksgiving because of the way the schedule sets up. And their goal to avoid the play-in, if they're 5-7 after 12 games, or God forbid worse, that's not an ideal track, right? That all of a sudden you're just fighting to be in the play-in if you're starting to be, it's early, but still, it's not you're in a hole early on. So we'll see what happens here in the next few games.
So what I'm warning these people is, we always preach patience and hey, let's see, but the only good thing about this kind of schedule is you get to find out what kind of team you really have early.
Yeah.
So a week from now, we can see if we're going down the same track, or we go, there's sign. We keep seeing just enough signs to go, this could be okay. And then the last quarter comes up.
We've said that for the last 4 years now, I feel like. But yes, I agree.
And it feels like the last 4 weeks too. So let's see if we can have a little slightly better topic conversation. I think it's great, suppose, putting some other people in that we're throwing around what the lineup looks like.
Yeah.
Different combinations. Different combinations yield different things. Maybe they get on the break more. Maybe their half-court offense is a little bit, But we did say that they are getting more efficient with their shot chart, which is good. And people still have to get used to it. And I know the Heat always preaches, hey, first 20 games. So if we come out of that's 5-7, we're getting near that 20-game part in a hurry.
Yeah.
So, after this 5-7, so 12. So in 2 weeks, we're at 20 games.
That's 5-7. And by the way, then you come home and you face Philly, who I know Philly's had a shaky start, but they're still talented. Dallas, who's obviously a good team, and Milwaukee. So 3 more tough games coming up after this trip. So, yeah, I mean, again, if the Heat are going to start beating quality teams anytime soon, they better start now before it gets out of hand,
Well, do we count Milwaukee right now? Because they're more of a
I know. Milwaukee's struggling. I was going to say another positive for the Heat so far is there are only 2 teams in the East above 500. How about that? Cleveland at 9-0 and Boston at 7-2. Everyone else is either 500 or worse, which is insane.
That's true. So they can make up ground. And maybe we can go on a Giannis watch if they continue to be terrible. Because
1-6. Philly and Milwaukee 1-6. How about that? Think that you're fresh about the Heat. Think about that. Think about those teams and the fans of those teams.
And your center going after the journal. Got your big free agent signing. Worse, people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could really be worse.
It could be worse. Yeah, the Heat, I mean, again, 3-4. They still have a chance to have a good trip, right? Like, they barely lost to Phoenix. They would have won that game, in Phoenix. It would have been a great start to a trip. Best win of the season. Didn't happen. But we'll see what happens in Denver. All of a sudden, they beat Denver on Friday. Then fans are happy again. They have a quality win. They're 4-4. So things change fast. But yeah, right now we're just seeing a lot of the same issues that we've seen the last few years. Some encouraging signs, but just not enough so far.
I'm not greedy. Give me Denver or Minnesota.
Yeah. Oh yeah. If you
I'm
take
not
one
greedy.
of those,
Give me
yeah,
either one of those guys.
You take one of those, all of a sudden you're in a spot to maybe go 3-3 on the trip, which
Right.
I think at the start of it you'll take it, right? Considering how tough the trip is. So
Beating Detroit doesn't thrill me. That'll be fine. You'll take the win, but it's like, yeah, okay.
but a loss to Detroit, that would be not good.
Yes, and then we're gonna have to come with knives and pitchforks. I get it.
Yes.
But we're gonna let you go on out there because we know that Denver has snow issues. So enjoy the rest of the trip. Keep warm where you can, and we will see you again a week from now. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm John Devine. This is Anthony Chang, and we will see you next time.